Hello and welcome back to Stop and Go F1 for this, our driver ratings for the Miami Sprint Race weekend. For those of you who are new around here, we are going to give each driver a score between 1 and 10, but for the sprint race, it is a little bit different. We'll be giving them two scores. Firstly, a score out of 1 and 10 for their performance in the sprint, then a score between 1 and 10 for their performance in the main race. You'll take an average of the two, but it is a weighted average, so you get more for the feature race than you do for the sprint. Then that average will be their score for the weekend. My goodness, there we go. So without further ado, let's just bloody get into this, eh? Let's just get it started. Here we go, got our driver scores on the side there, our photo of Kevin Magnussen here as well, which means we're starting with Kevin Magnussen. And my goodness, what a weekend it was for Kevin Magnussen. Let's break it down a little bit. So in the sprint race, he qualified 14th and would finish the race 18th. But that doesn't necessarily tell the entire story. He terrorised Lewis Hamilton for the majority of the race, came away with 4 different penalties, all in the valiant effort to make sure that Nico Hülkenberg scored points, which he did. So, part of me is tempted to give him a 10, but I have not given him a 10. It's an interesting one because this is the second time he's done this now. He also did this in Saudi Arabia, but got less penalties because he was beefing with Yuki Tsunoda then and not Lewis Hamilton. The poohousery of it, the PG way of saying it there, is beautiful, and I love it. But also, it's not good. So he did his job perfectly, but it was a bit dirty. I'm going to give him a 5, I think. 5, sorry, not a 5 overall. That's a 5 for the sprint. He got a 5 for the sprint. In the main race, he qualified 18th, finished the race in 19th. Got another penalty for the crash with Logan Sargent, which personally I don't agree with. You may disagree with me there. I really felt that was more Sargent's fault than Magnussen's, because Magnussen was alongside and then Sargent just kind of ran him off the road. I know it's not a conventional place to have your car at that point, but he was there, and Sargent should use his mirrors. But yeah, got another penalty points for that. He's now on 10 penalty points, and if you get 12, it's a race ban. So Kevin Magnussen cutting it fine here because it's 3 penalty points for just like the average thing. So I would not be surprised if Kevin Magnussen receives a race ban relatively soon. So that's one to keep an eye on. For the main race, I have given him a 2, just because he did have that crash. He was massively out of place not massively out of place, he's still in a Haas, but he was out of place for qualifying, and he's fighting people now and defending people strongly in the race, and it wasn't even for anything, because Hülkenberg was massively ahead. He wasn't defending the team or anything. In the sprint, I can understand it, because he's doing it for the team. Here, it was like for 14th place, not even that, probably like 17th. So for the main race, I gave him a 2 out of 10, which gives him an average of a 3 for Kevin Magnussen, which is a shame because I like Magnussen. I do think he's a good guy, and he does what's best for the team. And I've seen lots of people go, oh man, this proved that Magnussen's out of a job at the end of the year. If anything, this proved that Magnussen should stay in a job next year, because he is willing to risk a race ban to make sure that the Haas team secured 2 points. And that is a team player. Here's the man who scored the points, though. It's Nico Hülkenberg. Qualified 10th for the sprint, finished it in 7th place. Great job from him. Once again, very much helped by Kevin Magnussen, but nonetheless, another great job from Nico Hülkenberg. So I gave him a 10 out of 10 for the sprint. Then into the main race. Qualified 9th, finished the race in 11th, still fantastic job from him, really good. I gave him a 9 for the feature, so it's a 9 overall for Nico Hülkenberg, a fantastic job, and hopefully, when he ends up in that Audi, maybe he can be fighting for places a bit further up the grid. Zhou Guanyu now, in the Stake F1 Team Kick Sauber, he had a good day on the Saturday, qualified 17th for the sprint, would finish in 11th, which I believe is his best finish of the year in any race, I think. I have to double check that, but still, very good result from him. No points, it wouldn't be points even in the feature race, but 11th, still a very good job in that car, so I gave him a 9 for that. In the main race, qualifying wasn't exactly there. He did qualify last, but got promoted due to Ricciardo's penalty, so he started 19th, would finish the race in 14th and was kind of just nowhere for most of the race. I mean, gaining a few positions is pretty good. I gave him a 7 for the main race, so it's an 8 overall for Zhou, which I think might be his best result of the year that I've given him so far. So the Stake F1 team Kick Sauber car seems to be going in the right direction, so that's good for him. His teammate Valtteri Bottas, how was his weekend? A bit middling. So in the sprint race, he qualified 19th, finished the race in 14th, so got some good positions there. Gave him a 7 for that. But in the main race, would qualify 16th, finish 16th. Yeah, just really nowhere yet again for Bottas. Another one of those races when he just goes out, comes back in, and you just go, well, what did Bottas do today? Not a clue. But he was there, allegedly. So I gave him a 5 for the main race. It's a 6 overall for Valtteri Bottas. Now, this man is someone we should really want to talk about this weekend because he had a fantastic race in both races. So, in the sprint, qualifies 15th, finishes 8th, secures that last points finish for the Racing Bills. Then, in the main race, qualifies 10th, finishes the race 7th, fantastic points for the team, fantastic points for him, doing really well, putting that bad weekend of China behind him. I know he still had a not great qualifying for the sprint, but he more than made up for that in the feature race and brought home some really good points. I gave him a 10 out of 10 for the sprint, I gave him a 10 out of 10 for the feature, so he gets a 10 out of 10 for the entire weekend to Yuki Tsunoda. Really great stuff from him. His teammate, though, is more of a weekend of two halves. Sprint race, fantastic stuff from him. Qualifies 4th, finishes the race in 4th, defends really well against Carlos Sainz. He was helped initially by the DRS of Sergio Perez, but that wasn't for the entire race. For the latter half of the race, of the sprint race, he had to defend against that Ferrari with no DRS and still did it incredibly well to come home in 4th in that car. So that was a 10 out of 10 from me for the sprint. Feature race, not as good. Qualified 17th, goes pushed down to 20th due to a grid place penalty due to overtaking under safety car in China. And then from there, finishes the race in 15th, gains a few positions, but just really wasn't anywhere in the race. Quite disappointing for his main race, so I gave him a 5 for that. Overall, it's a 7 out of 10 for Daniel Ricciardo's weekend, but hopefully this does show that he has the ability in that car, and going forward, hopefully we'll see more of sprint race Ricciardo than we did of feature race, and hopefully we can get in a race this season where both Yuki and Ricciardo do well at the same time, which seems like it's a thing that will never happen at the minute. Here's Logan Sargent. Logan Sargent, okie dokie then. So in the sprint race, he actually had quite a good one. Qualifies 18th, finishes 10th, which is incredible for Logan Sargent to finish 10th. I did not see that come in whatsoever, so I gave him a 10 out of 10 for the sprint race. Didn't get score points, he only get points down to 8th in the sprint, but still, a 10th place finish in any session is incredible for Logan Sargent, so 10 out of 10 for him there. In the main race, a bit of a different one for him. He qualified 17th, would finish the race. He wouldn't finish the race because he was involved in that crash with Kevin Magnussen. So I just gave him a 5 for that one, just straight down the middle. Not really much to say about that. So overall, it is a 7 for Logan Sargent, which still is actually a very good score for him. Alexander Albon, bit of an interesting one for him. A decent race in the sprint, would start dead last and would end up finishing in 13th, so making up some good positions there. So I gave him an 8 out of 10 for the sprint race. But in the feature, he qualified 14th, and then was just really round the back of the pack for a lot of it. Didn't really see much of him. Then has a huge lockup at the end of the race, which just destroys any progress that he made. He pitted for the softs at the end and still didn't really come out anywhere. Didn't really have... I thought maybe he would try and get a fastest lap, but I guess he was not going to be challenging the likes of the McLarens this weekend for the fastest lap. So yeah, it wasn't a great one for him. I gave him a 3 for the feature, which gives him a 4 overall. Across to Alpine now, who've had a very good weekend. Their first good weekend of the year. Fantastic stuff for them. Esteban Ocon, sprint race, not as good. Qualifies 13th, ends up in 15th, so I gave him a 5 for that. Goes straight down the middle. But in the main race, qualifies 13th, finishes 10th, gets the first point of the year for the Alpine team. That deserves a 10 out of 10 in my opinion there. So he gets an 8 overall for the weekend. His teammate Pierre Gasly had a very good sprint race, qualified 16th, finished the race in 9th. Fantastic stuff, was very close to getting that point. Just one position off a points place in the sprint, so a 10 out of 10 for him in the sprint. And in the main race, yet again, another decent race. Qualified 12th, finished the race 11th, so an 8 for him there, and overall that is a 9 for Pierre Gasly. Lance Stroll, interesting one for him. So he out-qualified Alonso in both qualifyings here. He qualified 7th in the sprint and didn't finish. I gave him a 5 for that. And then in the main race, he qualified 11th, and he finished, I believe, it was 17th. He got a 10-second penalty near the end of the race for leaving the track and gaining an advantage. I don't remember him actually doing that, but allegedly he did. So I'm just going to give him a 5 for that. So it is just a 5 straight down the middle for Lance Stroll. Fernando Alonso, a bit of a weekend to forget for him. The Aston seemed to be off the pace, and as did he. As I said, he got beaten by Stroll in both qualifying sessions. In the sprint, he qualified 8th, got caught up in that incident into turn 1. From there, just really didn't have any pace whatsoever. Round at the back, so 17th place was the best he could do in the sprint, so I gave him a 5 for that. Qualifying was very bad for the race, qualifying 15th. Would eventually, though, finish in 9th to bring home a couple of points, so I gave him a 7 there, which is overall a 6 for Fernando Alonso. McLaren now, and what a weekend to be a McLaren fan. Oscar Piastri qualifies 6th, finishes 6th in the sprint, gave him 8 out of 10 for that. Then in the feature, it's another 6th, qualifying 6th again, and had a great race, really, really good. P2 initially at the start of the race and coped with that gap with Max Verstappen really well, keeping it nice and steady. He was on Lando was on the alternative strategy. He was on the regular strategy, so he was pitting alongside the Ferraris and Red Bulls, still manages to keep his own, fighting really well against Carlos Sainz at the end of the race. Unfortunately, has that contact with Sainz, which broke his front wing, and he had to go back to the back of the grid after he pitted from there. But even from there, fought back really well, made some really nice moves. In the end, it would only be good enough for 13th place, but nonetheless, a fantastic race weekend for Oscar Piastri. I actually gave him a 10 out of 10 for the feature. Overall, though, that is a 9 out of 10 for Oscar Piastri, who I think had a fantastic weekend. But here is the man of the moment. But that moment isn't quite yet, because I have to talk about his feature race first. So he qualified 9th. And then he would DNF in that race. He was also caught up in that incident. The qualifying for him in the sprint was really not good. With the pace that car had, a 9th place for Norris in the sprint really wasn't good enough, and it was that which contributed to him being out of place and being involved in that crash. So I actually gave him a 4 for the sprint, because everything bad that happened in that sprint race came from him qualifying under where he should have been. But the main race was a completely different story. Qualifies 5th, and I think he could have qualified even higher if McLaren had sent him out on the softs for his first time lap, when everyone else seemed to be going a little bit quicker. He could have been in that top 3, even on the front row, and then, yes, masterfully managed the pace. He seemed a bit slow at the start, but I think it was just because he was stuck behind Perez, who had a far greater straight line speed than him. Once Perez was gone, he managed his tyres really well whilst just consistently setting fastest lap after fastest lap after fastest lap after fastest lap. You know, you could say, oh, he got lucky with the safety car, and maybe he was lucky with the safety car, but also he managed his tyres better than everyone else. He was still setting fastest laps on those old tyres after everyone else had already pitted. So he just managed it perfectly, and then from there, his restart off the safety car wasn't too good, but it didn't matter. After one lap, he was more than a second away from Max Verstappen, which I don't think anyone has done for the last 2 or 3 years. And then from there, of course, goes on to win the race, and a fantastic win it was. So it's a 10 out of 10 for Lando in the feature. Unfortunately, though, because we have to work out the average for Lando is an 8. But I don't want to I don't want to have that take away from anything from that main feature race where he was absolutely fantastic. Let's go across to the Ferraris now. Carlos Sainz qualifies 5th, finishes 5th in the sprint. Gave him an 8 for that. And in the feature race, qualifies 3rd, finishes 4th, then gets a 5-second penalty for the incident between him and Piastri, which pushes him down to 5th. So I gave him a 7 for that one. Overall, it is a 7. His teammate, Charles Leclerc, qualifies 2nd, finishes 2nd in the sprint. Gave him a 10 out of 10. Fantastic for there. And then in the feature, qualifies 2nd, finishes 3rd. Gave him a 9 out of 10 for Charles Leclerc. Across to Mercedes, and it's a bit of a bit of an interesting one. George Russell had an awful sprint, by the way. Qualifies 11th, finishes 12th, and was just nowhere. Didn't seem to have any incidents, was not in an all-out war against Kevin Magnussen, benefited actually from the penalties for Magnussen and for Hamilton, because otherwise he would have been 13th. I gave him a 1 out of 10 for the sprint, because he really just did nothing. Then in the feature race, a little bit better. He qualifies 7th, finishes the race in 8th, so I give him a 6 for that. It's a 4 overall on the weekend for George Russell. His teammate, Lewis Hamilton, as I said in the sprint, that infamous battle with Kevin Magnussen. He qualifies 12th, finishes the race in 16th after he got a penalty for speeding in the pit lane. I gave him a 4 overall for that one. The reason I gave him a higher score than I did... Sorry, I gave him a lower score than I did for Magnussen was just because Magnussen was playing that team game, and without him, the team wouldn't have scored points. Lewis, I feel, deserves 1 point less just because, you know, he got the penalty, which was a bit of a silly one to get because it's quite, you know, you just put the pit speed lane limiter on. He was 10 kilometers an hour over what the limit is, and that could have easily been avoided there. So a 4 for Lewis in the sprint, but in the main race he actually did fantastically. He qualified 8th, finished off in 6th, which was a great result for the Mercedes team here this weekend, where they seem to be really struggling. So I gave him an 8 out of 10 for the feature, which overall is a 7. And across to the Red Bull guys now. Firstly, Sergio Perez. He qualified 3rd, finishes 3rd in the sprint, so I gave him an 8. Then in the feature, he qualified 4th, finished 4th. I gave him that's a 7. That's probably a 6, to be honest. I'm going to give him a 6. So overall, it's a 6 out of 10 for Sergio Perez. And then the world champion, Max Verstappen, sprint race 1st to 1st, so 10 out of 10 for that one. Then in the feature, qualifies on pole, but would inevitably finish in 2nd place. The Red Bull seem to be lacking the pace of the McLaren, especially in that later stage. Overall, though, I think Max still did a wonderful job, a great drive for him. So I'm going to give him a 9 for the feature, which gives him an average of a 9 out of 10. So there you go. There are our driver ratings for all of the sprint and feature of the weekend. So the highest rated is Yuki Tsunoda with a 10 out of 10. Lowest rated, Kevin Magnussen with a 3 out of 10. And with that, the Miami weekend is over. I'm going to take these sunglasses off, put my regular glasses back on. Oh my god, I can actually see my notes in front of me, man. Wonderful. There we go. On the channel on Friday, because there is no race weekend this weekend, I have a video coming out on that AI autonomous race that happened a couple of weeks ago. So that'll be up on the channel on Friday. Then I'll be back on Saturday with any news that comes up during the week. So the news video on Saturday. And then in 2 weeks' time, back here yet again for Imola, which should be very fun. Oscar Piastri will have all the upgrades there that Lando Norris had this weekend. So McLaren, yet again, ones to watch. I imagine lots of teams will be bringing upgrades to that Imola race just because it's the first of the European leg. So it should be very, very interesting. I look forward to it, and I'll see you then. Until next time, goodbye.